The night had draped itself over the Arizona desert like a dark velvet cloak, punctuated only by the stars above and the occasional glimmer of distant lights. I, Marcus, drove my semi-truck, a behemoth of steel and diesel, its rumble a constant companion through the solitude. The road ahead, illuminated by my headlights, stretched into the horizon, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the wilderness. It was on this lonely stretch that I saw her. A figure, seemingly conjured from the night itself, stood by the roadside. Her form was a shadow against the backdrop of the desert under the moonlight. My heart skipped a beat, a mix of surprise and an inexplicable sense of foreboding washing over me as I slowed the truck to a halt. She approached the passenger side, her movements hesitant yet determined. As she came closer, the dim light revealed her features. Her dress, once white, now tattered and stained, fluttered in the gentle night breeze, and her hair, a cascade of shadows, framed a face marked by hardship and fear. "Are you all right?" I called out, rolling down the window. My voice felt oddly loud in the vast silence that surrounded us. I need a ride," she replied, her voice a fragile whisper, barely rising above the whisper of the wind. "To where?" I asked, though a part of me already knew that it didn't matter. There was a plea in her eyes that I couldn't ignore. "Far from here. North," she said, a hint of urgency underlying her words. I hesitated for a moment, the rational part of my mind listing 1,000 reasons why this was a bad idea. Yet, when I looked into her eyes, I saw something that made my decision for me. There was fear, yes, but also a determination, a plea for help that I couldn't deny. "Get in," I said, unlocking the passenger door. "I'm Marcus, by the way." "Eliza," she offered in return, her voice gaining a bit of strength as she climbed into the cab. As we drove, the silence between us was a living thing, filled with the unsaid and the unknown. I stole glances at her, trying to piece together the story of how she ended up alone in the desert at night. Her profile was illuminated intermittently by the passing lights, revealing a mix of vulnerability and resilience. "So, Eliza, what brings you out here in the middle of the night?" I ventured, breaking the silence. She turned to me, her eyes reflecting a world of pain and secrets. "I'm running," she said simply, yet the weight of her words hung heavily in the air. "From what?" I asked, my curiosity piqued, though I wasn't sure I was ready for the answer. Her gaze shifted back to the window, watching the desert fly by. "A life that wasn't mine," she replied, her voice a blend of sorrow and defiance. I wanted to ask more, to understand the shadows that lingered in her eyes, but I sensed that her story was one that couldn't be unraveled with a few questions. So, I focused on the road ahead, the silence once again settling between us, a companion as constant as the hum of the engine. The night stretched on, the landscape outside changing yet remaining the same, endless and untouched. Inside the cab, the space between us was filled with the stories untold, the past unspoken, and a journey into the unknown. And as we drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter, this decision to stop, had altered the course of my night in ways I could not yet comprehend. As miles turned into memories, the desert night wore on, a silent witness to our solitary journey. The atmosphere within the cab of my semi-truck, now shared with Eliza, was thick with the unspoken and the unknown. My name, Marcus, and her name, Eliza, were the only certainties in a sea of mysteries that stretched out before us under the starlit sky. The road ahead seemed endless, a pathway not just through the desert, but through a realm of shadows and whispers. It was Eliza who broke the silence, her voice low, almost blending with the soft hum of the truck's engine. "Do you believe in ghosts, Marcus?" she asked, her gaze fixed on the window, reflecting the passing night. I glanced at her, surprised by the question. "Ghosts? Can't say I do. Why do you ask?" She turned to face me, her eyes deep pools of darkness in the dim light. "Because I feel like I've been haunted all my life," she replied, a tremor in her voice. Before I could respond, a chill ran down my spine as a faint whisper seemed to echo through the cab. I shook my head, attributing it to the wind or the tires on the asphalt, yet the uneasy feeling lingered. As if sensing my discomfort, Eliza whispered, "Do you hear it? The whispers?" I strained my ears, and there it was again, a low murmur, indistinct yet unmistakably there. "What is that?" I muttered, more to myself than to her. "I don't know, but it's been following me," Eliza said, a note of fear creeping into her voice. The whispers grew in intensity, a chorus of voices without source, enveloping us in a sound that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I felt a surge of protectiveness, a need to reassure her, to dispel the growing fear. "It's just the wind, Eliza. The desert can play tricks on your mind at night." She looked at me, wanting to believe but held back by a lifetime of shadows. "I hope you're right," she whispered back. The night pressed on, and with it the whispers seemed to fade, leaving behind an oppressive silence. It was then that we saw it, a figure, barely more than a silhouette, standing in the middle of the road ahead. I slowed the truck, my heart racing as the figure seemed to dissolve into the air, a mirage born of darkness and fear. Eliza and I exchanged a look, a wordless communication that acknowledged the impossibility of what we had just seen. "Did you see that?" I asked, though the question was unnecessary. "Yes," she breathed, her voice barely audible. "It's them, isn't it? The ones who haunt me." I wanted to deny it, to rationalize what we had seen, but the certainty in her voice and the chill in my own bones told me that some mysteries refused to be ignored. "We'll get through this together," I said instead, focusing on the road ahead, where the desert stretched on under the watchful eyes of the stars. The encounter with the spectral figure had shifted something between us, a shared experience that bound us in our journey through the night. As we drove, the darkness seemed less oppressive, the whispers a distant memory. Yet the shadows that clung to Eliza, and now to me, whispered of secrets and fears that lurked just beyond the reach of the headlights, waiting in the echoes of the darkness. As the first hints of dawn began to pierce the night, the endless desert gave way to the outskirts of civilization. Our journey, meandering through the shadows and whispers of the night, seemed to be drawing to a close. Yet the tension between us, Marcus and Eliza, hinted at a confrontation yet to come, a final act in a night full of mysteries. The city's silhouette loomed ahead, its buildings like specters in the early morning light. Eliza's demeanor shifted, her body tensing as if bracing for an impact. I glanced at her, noting the worry lines etched deeply into her features. "We're almost there, Eliza. How are you feeling?" I ventured, breaking the silence that had settled between us. She sighed, a sound heavy with unspoken fears. "Anxious. I don't know what awaits us, Marcus. But I'm grateful I'm not facing it alone." Her words struck a chord within me, reinforcing the bond that had formed between us, born of shared experiences too strange and terrifying to fully comprehend. As we navigated the quiet streets, the first rays of sunlight began to dispel the darkness, casting long shadows that seemed to retreat before the approaching day. It was then that we saw him, a figure standing in the middle of the road, as if materialized from the thin morning mist. I slowed the truck, my heart hammering in my chest. Eliza gasped, her hand gripping the door handle. "It's him, my father." The man's presence filled the street with a palpable sense of dread. His eyes, dark and unyielding, locked onto Eliza with an intensity that spoke of deep-seated zealotry. "You thought you could escape," he said, his voice carrying to us, cold and unwavering. "Escape from your destiny, from the path the Lord has set for you." Eliza's voice was a whisper, laced with fear and defiance. "I'm not yours to control, not anymore." The standoff stretched on, a silent battle of wills between Eliza and the man who claimed dominion over her soul. I reached for her hand, an unspoken promise of support, of solidarity against the darkness that sought to reclaim her. It was Eliza who broke the stalemate, her decision carried on the wings of newfound courage. "Let's go, Marcus. He has no power over me. Not anymore." With a nod, I shifted the truck into gear, ready to drive past the man who represented all the horrors of Eliza's past. But as we attempted to pass, he stepped forward, a final, desperate bid to assert his control. "You cannot run from the will of the Lord," he shouted, his voice echoing off the empty buildings. Eliza turned to face him, her voice clear and resolute. "I am not running. I am choosing a life free from your chains." With that, we drove past him, leaving behind the specter of Eliza's past, a ghostly figure diminishing in the rearview mirror. As we left the city's limits, the early morning light seemed to cleanse the night's terrors, offering a promise of new beginnings. Eliza leaned back, a sigh of relief escaping her lips. "Thank you, Marcus, for everything." I smiled, the road ahead bright with the promise of dawn. "We faced the darkness together, Eliza. Now let's welcome the light." As the city faded behind us, our journey together, a journey through night, through fear, and into the light, felt like a chapter closing, leaving us to step into the day, forever changed but unbroken.